We saw a ton of horror movies last year, and now it's time to bring you our best of the best of horror from 2024. We're going to be talking about our top 10 favorite horror movies from last year. But before we jump into all that, welcome to Dread Alert. I'm Vince.
I'm Sarah.
Be sure to like this video if you like it. Subscribe to our channel for more horror content. We publish content on most days. What was your number 10 favorite movie in 2024?
That would be Strange Darling, which I believe is also your number
Same.
10.
Yeah.
This movie kind of surprised me. It's not the most surprising film for me of the year, but I do think that this movie in particular surprised me because it's an erotic thriller. But I really loved this movie, even though I kind of saw the twist coming in it.
Yeah, it was more about the why of the twist than the what of the twist for me, and I think that's really exciting. I did see the twist coming miles ahead. That didn't take away from the movie for me, though. The performances were really strong, and the motivations of the characters they were interesting enough for me to keep my attention, keep me engaged. I will say that the erotic thriller element never really does it for me, which is why I was surprised that this movie made my top 10 list. But I think it was such a strong film. The storytelling and narrative devices with the chapters being out of order, the slow burn of the plot, and honestly, the action sequences as well were really exciting to me.
I do love that they told this story in a non-linear fashion. I think that actually helped this movie rather than hindered it.
Totally agree.
What about your number 9?
My number 9 is, this movie's probably a little low for most people's taste, but my number 9 is maxxxine.
maxxxine.
I really enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed the whole trilogy. And this movie was one that sort of bounced around my list. I probably had it ranked a little lower than I'm going to have it land in my top 10 list. When we initially reviewed the film, I think I gave it an 8, an 8.5. And I would say it's probably maybe still an 8.5, maybe a 9. This movie's grown on me quite a bit. I'm really glad we own it. I'm really looking forward to the Tim Wagner novelization, which is coming out in early 2025. And I think the performances are what sell this movie for me. Also, vibes. This movie is one of the most vibey movies of the year. And at the end of the day, anything with Mia Goth is going to be on my top 10 list, most likely. She's fantastic.
She really is. And I do think that Ty West does vibey horror very, very well. He always has a mood, a tone, and the characters within that fit the vibe immediately. And that's with any of his movies. And I think that is a strength of maxxxine in particular.
Absolutely. What about you? What's your number 9?
My number 9 was Cuckoo. Now, this may be a surprise because I know that this movie was sort of polarizing to certain people. I really loved this movie. I also think, to go off of your point about maxxxine, I think this movie does have a lot of vibes as well. Maybe not the same vibes, but we've got an isolation that's happening, and then a mysterious creature, which I actually really enjoyed the creature design in this film. But again, the performances really sold this movie for me. Hunter Schafer in particular gave a really strong final girl performance in this movie, and Dan Stevens was so good in this movie. Yeah. And I think that's why it had to land where it did in my top 10.
Yeah, Dan Stevens has turned out a number of good performances this year, but that was probably my favorite of him.
I would agree. This performance was very, very strong.
What about your number 8 film for the year?
My number 8 film of the year is Abigail. Again, this might be a polarizing decision. A lot of people sort of went one way or the other on this film. For me, I really loved Ready or Not, and this has a lot of very similar vibes. Obviously, Radio Silence directed this film. It does have some heist movie qualities in it. It's also a vampire story, but I really love the ensemble cast in this movie in particular. Some really strong performances, again, by Dan Stevens and Melissa Barrera in particular. And Alicia Weir, who plays Abigail, is also a very strong performance.
She was fantastic in the movie. I will say this movie doesn't crack my top 10 list. You won't be hearing me give extensive thoughts on Abigail, but I will say I found this movie to be very exciting in the third act. Some of the lead up to the third act just didn't click for me, but I don't think it's by any means a bad movie. It's in the upper half of my list for the year.
I just really enjoy this sort of genre. I'm really excited about Radio Silence. I don't know why. They really resonate with me. Ready or Not was a fantastic movie, and I can't wait for Ready or Not 2. What about your number 8?
I think this is going to make you a little upset, maybe some of you as well, that I've ranked this movie so low, but it's Late Night with the Devil. This movie is probably the only found footage movie that cracked our top 10 list, and I think it is an excellent take on found footage. I love these sort of pseudo broadcast style found footage movies. I think the performances were out of this world. The only thing that holds this back from being a top 5 movie for me is the end sequence. Now, I know what they were trying to accomplish. I feel like they were making the audience complicit in some ways, saying perhaps that we were also hypnotized and that our view of that last act of the movie wasn't objective, it was subjective. But if you aren't watching with such a meticulous eye for the style and form of the movie, you may just be wondering why they broke the found footage device. And I just can't get over that. I feel like the last bit of the movie is really exciting, but I've invested so much time into this broadcast, and then when we deviate from it, it just feels a little crunchy to me. I've seen this movie multiple times last year, and I'm excited about this movie. I love this movie. It might be one of my favorite movies of the year without this list. But when you're asking me to formally rank the movies that I saw last year, I have to take a couple of points off for deviating from the thing you sold me and got me to buy a ticket with.
I understand that. I'm going to reserve my thoughts and opinions on Late Night with the Devil because it is going to be showing up on my list later. But I do agree that the third act of this film in particular is very jarring when you're not expecting it.
Yeah. And on a rewatch, it was just as jarring, but I had time to think about why I was experiencing this and why they were telling the story in this way. And it softened the blow, but we had some really good movies this year. It has to be at number 8 for me. I'm sorry. What about your number 7 movie?
My number 7 movie was Oddity.
Same.
Oh, yeah, no, this movie was really fantastic. And I had watched this movie prior to watching Caveat, which is Damien McCarthy's other movie. And I really loved this movie, A Ghost Story. It is very vibey. This movie is full of suspense. And I really loved going on this journey. And this also had a very horrible man in it. And I was really rooting against this man.
Yeah, bad horror husbands. They're all over the place.
It's the trope right now.
I like this movie a lot. I feel like it is an EC comic just brought to life on screen. I love the wooden monster man, as I called him Monster Man the whole time we watched this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the performances were really exciting. I also think a lead character with a disability heightens the stakes, although she is incredibly capable this entire time. I don't feel like that disability holds her back. I don't feel like we're playing down to a disability or punching down at the character, but it does heighten the stakes in ways that make it very tense, and it really amps up that third act. This movie is full of horrible men, not just the husband, working in conjunction with one another, without giving too many spoilers. And it really is true to Damien McCarthy's style. I'm really excited to see anything out of him next, whatever he has next. He's becoming quickly one of my favorite horror directors.
He is really exciting right now, and after watching Caveat, which is his other film, if you haven't seen that yet, you should absolutely watch that too if you loved Oddity.
I actually got to attend a webinar with Damien McCarthy, and I think one of the most interesting things about him and his past and his visual style, and if you see Caveat, you'll probably understand where I'm going with this, is that he was an electrician prior to becoming a director. He just was an electrician by day and directing films as well. And the sense of claustrophobia that he offers with these films, I wonder if that doesn't play into running wire through walls and crawling around in crawl spaces. You definitely get that vibe from Caveat specifically, but it's also present in Oddity as well.
What about your number 6 movie?
I believe we share the same number 6 as well, and this movie is very exciting. I was looking forward to this movie so very much. It's Your Monster, starring Melissa Barrera, and I have just watched her grow as a performer from Scream 5 through Your Monster, including Abigail, and I think she's done amazing things as a performer. I have not been shy with saying that her performance in Scream 5 was a bit hit or miss for me in some parts of that film. Overall, it's fine, but there were some scenes where I feel like it was just a bit of a miss. There was not a moment of Your Monster where I feel like it was a miss. And if you haven't seen it, which I suspect some of you haven't, do yourself a favor and check it out. Now, is it a full-on horror movie from front to back? No. It is a romantic comedy with monster movie elements and a heavy dose of New York theater. And we come from a theater background. We know 99% of those characters, and they are true to life in the archetypical ways that they're presented. I could just list people off from our personal life who fit those molds. It's very true. It's very honest, and you really, really empathize with Melissa Barrera's character here. And I'm not one for rom-coms. It's not my favorite genre, but this movie is also quite cute. It is a very heartfelt, heartwarming movie. And the ending, I feel like it's not as ambiguous as I want it to be, but it does give you a lot to think about and chew on as the credits are rolling.
As a female fan of horror, it is much appreciated that we are now getting this subgenre of horror, because this is a perfect date night movie. It really, really is. It's got a little bit of everything. You have the horror elements, the monster elements, musical. You didn't even mention that there are musical elements in this movie.
I said theater, but it is musical theater, and that is what I got my degree in, my bachelor's degree in. So it just hit really close to home. That is a horror movie in and of itself.
Exactly. But this movie, I think it is not on my comfort movie list. We are going to be talking about our comfort movies of the year, but I do think that it is going to become a comfort movie for me coming up here, because it is one that you could easily turn on in the background if you are doing something else, and it just sets a good vibe and a good tone.
Yeah.
And I really did love Melissa Barrera in this film in particular. I thought that she played this role so well. Her singing is phenomenal.
Yeah, she's great.
She was in the Heights as well, the movie version of In the Heights. So I knew she could sing, but man, she can sing. Like, she's
her dancing
so
was great.
good.
Yeah, she was really great. Although I do love that you say it has like a lighthearted tone and vibes. It is a breakup cancer story. We are not.
Oh yeah, no, it totally is. But
don't missell this to people.
Yeah, but it still has some like really fun and cute moments. And I was really, really rooting for not only her character, but also Monster.
I love that he doesn't get a name.
No, he's just Monster.
He's just Monster.
He's so cute.
His performance was great as well.
So good.
Very, very empathetic character. Like the kind of guy you're rooting for. It's so worth your time.
It is so worth it. We absolutely loved this movie.
What is your number 5 film of 2024?
My number 5 film, we share this, and it is one of the last movies that we saw this year, Nosferatu.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It is a good one. This movie was just spectacularly beautiful, and you really come to expect that with Robert Eggers. All of his movies are so beautiful and brilliant, and the acting in this movie was very incredible. The creature design for Count Orlok. You know what else I really loved? Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe. He's so good.
So good.
Oh, he's so good. This whole movie was fantastic. We were lucky enough to see an advanced screening. We got our cool little beanie. We got a couple posters. We covered this already on the channel. If you want more information about what we both thought, check that video out. But at the end of the day, I think this movie is faithful not only to Robert Eggers, but to the original Nosferatu, which does deviate some from the novel Dracula. And that's okay. I think this is a love song to film and film history. I think that Robert Eggers did the legwork in folklore, in historical styles, in historical dress, the costume design, the scenic design, the color grading. All of this is just perfection. This movie is a masterpiece. I need to see it again before I bump it up this list, because the 4 movies that we have in front of it, I've spent a lot of time with and really, truly love. I will say this was such a cool experience seeing it, when we got to see it, how we got to see it, and with all the swag that we got from it. And that really helped bolster this movie, in my opinion, as well. And plus, Count Orlok hangs dong.
He does hang dong in this movie.
So that's bumped it up the list considerably. But no, honestly, the performances are just so good. The dead language they resurrected for Count Orlok and Bill Skarsgård in this movie is so good. I know this movie's getting a lot of hate right now, but I wonder how much of that hate is coming because this is Robert Eggers' most commercial film. if not his most mature film. And the fact that some folks just don't like things that get a lot of attention or are very popular.
I also think that Robert Eggers is probably of an acquired taste.
I would say I was born with a Robert Eggers taste. I did not need any warming up to The Witch, and I think The Lighthouse is probably maybe my favorite of his, and just a completely surreal, psychedelic ride. But this is not that. This is its own film and something he's been living with for nearly a decade, and I'm so glad it made its way to the big screen.
What about your number 4 movie?
My number 4 movie, and it's breaking my heart to say this, so you know how good 3, 2, and 1 must be if I'm going to say that Terrifier 3 is my number 4 movie of the year, because I loved Terrifier 3. I mean, like, I loved this movie so much. I thought it was hilarious and disturbing and heartwarming. I felt like this movie was just a masterpiece of Damien Leone's filmmaking. We've watched this man go from literal low-budget short films to Grindhouse Art the Clown, all the way up through major motion picture, and he's not missed a beat. And leave all that aside, David Howard Thornton's performance in this movie was the best it's ever been. Partially due to the new latex mask they made off of a mold of his head, as opposed to using the old Mike Gianelli mold, and that limited some of the range of motion art's face could provide. But I really think David Howard Thornton is one of the most physically talented and intentionally clear. When he's acting, you understand what he's doing. The only reason this movie's at number 4 instead of number 1 is I felt like some of the family scenes held the movie down a bit. It didn't make it drag. It's just, I'm just not as invested in these new characters who popped up. And I want to see Sienna. I want to see Jonathan. I want to see that relationship in the forefront of this. I want to pick up where we left off with Terrifier 2. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we spent a lot of time building new relationships, which in the end of the movie were fulfilling. We didn't waste our time there, but upon rewatch, I felt like, okay, you know?
You just wanted a little bit more.
I wanted it to move through that a little bit. I didn't need a home makeup tutorial scene or a journal reading scene. I just didn't need all of that in my life. It could have been executed a little faster. But I think it was one of the best years on record for horror. So if you're number 4 in that year, I think you're doing pretty well. Plus, you're the highest grossing unrated horror film of all time. Put the feather in your cap. You didn't miss a beat.
It's crazy. I mean, the amount of success that the Terrifier franchise is seeing now, I am so happy to see an independent horror film doing so well at the box office. I agree that the same reasons that this movie didn't make my top 10 are the same reasons that it's a little lower on your list. So my number 4 movie of the year was Late Night with the Devil. So this is a little higher up on my list. Honestly, it was a lot higher until I saw some of the other movies. However, this movie hit for me. I really loved the 70s aesthetic of this film. You're really going to get me with that. I love a period film. I thought that they did that well. I loved getting the broadcast and then the black and white sort of behind the scenes
Lots of folks had issues with that.
I loved it.
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite things about the film. We also got a possession movie in here. There was a lot to love about this film, and David Dastmalchian was fantastic in this movie.
He's made a fan for life out of me with this one. And I will say this movie was quite immersive in the 70s aspect.
I loved the end of this film. It hit for me. But again, I feel like it's a little surreal. And I think that if you're not willing to go on that ride and that journey at the end of the film because you're used to seeing one thing, it is jarring. It's like a shock to the system to kind of see that third act.
You know I love surrealism. You know I love David Lynch, and I am always going to be here for that. But you know I love found footage. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we're going to have to agree to disagree. Number 4 has been really contentious today, huh?
I know, yeah. This is gonna be it for us.
Yeah, wait. What's your number 3 film?
Our number 3 film is a shared one again, and it is Longlegs.
Longlegs.
I know.
I love you, Longlegs.
Honestly, I am shocked that it is number 3 on your list in particular.
It breaks my heart, honestly, because it for a while was number 1 on my list, and I saw zero chance of that changing. Mm-hmm. Nicolas Cage delivers a completely unhinged performance. Maika Monroe is another one of those leading ladies who I will follow to the end of the earth. And the serial killer detective angle is something that I've loved since as far back as I can remember, since I started watching horror. I grew up on Seven and Silence of the Lambs and all the movies that inspired Longlegs. And Oz Perkins' direction achieves much better than I could ever attempt my sort of directing vision whenever I'm staging things, the symmetry and the way that symmetry starts to fracture as the movie stakes get higher. I think this is a nearly perfect film. Unfortunately, there are two almost 100% perfect films ahead of it. The one thing that didn't quite excite me about Longlegs is I was hoping for a better villain vehicle. Meaning, I don't necessarily find dolls creepy all the time. And if you haven't seen Longlegs, I'm sorry to spoil that for you. And the devil's creepy. Nicolas Cage is certainly creepy in this film. But the creepy doll didn't get me super excited. And I left the theater going, I wish it was something else. But I think the banality of it, I think how run-of-the-mill the doll is, in hindsight, makes this a little bit more creepy.
I would agree with that. I want to also just point out Alicia Witt's performance
Oh,
in this
please.
film.
Yes.
Because I really enjoyed Alicia Witt in this movie in particular, and she's one of the reasons that this movie is as high up on my list as it is. It's so good. Nicolas Cage, I am notoriously not a Nicolas Cage fan. However, I loved him in this movie. There was just something about it that was so jarring. It was so creepy, but it was also just so spot on in a weird way that like made sense in my brain. I don't know. It was so weird and wonderful.
He was just trying things. You know that every take was completely different and he was just out there doing the most random things and they picked the best, most random thing they could get out of him. We're going to have to come back to this film and do a full review of it because we have thoughts. I must have seen this movie, 7 times over the course of the year?
I don't know. You've watched it so many times. I've woken up in the middle of the night to Longlegs being on.
And very true. And I have lots of thoughts about this movie. And what I really love about it is there's so much world building in the marketing. There's so much, code cracking and downloadable zip files. And on the Blu-ray, there's evidence and crime scene photos. There's so much to unpack with this movie. And none of it is handed to you on a silver platter. Even if you take the film on its own terms, you don't get all of the answers. And I'm still chewing on the ending of this movie. And day to day, my opinions on it change. I cannot believe it's number 3 on my list.
I know. It's crazy to me that it's that low on your list. And not that number 3 is low. It is not low by any stretch of the imagination. But knowing how much you love this movie in particular, I am so surprised.
If you've heard us on other podcasts, you might have heard that Longlegs was one of my favorite horror movies of the moment of all time. And so the fact that there are 2 movies ahead of it, which I think executed just a hair better, is really surprising.
And at number 2...
At number 2, and I don't think anybody's going to disagree with this, maybe they're going to be upset that it's not at number 1, is The Substance. This movie was quite nearly a perfect film. I think that the biggest criticisms I've heard online are that the third act of this movie, or let's say like that end coda of the movie, came out of nowhere, were maybe a little bit too over the top. Maybe the movie was a half an hour too long. I tend to disagree with this, but a lot of the time it's because I'm a big Sam Raimi fan. And I'm a big campy horror fan, and over the top is something that I'm always going to gravitate towards. Most of the message of this film is delivered before we get there, and I think this takes that message and just tries to deliver the inverse of it and deliver it in a new way, where we're talking about female beauty standards, and then this whole monstrosity thing appears, and how people placate it and then are terrified by it. I think it's just the inverse messaging of the rest of the film, which gives us a really complete social message. And look, if you're not looking for a feminist horror film from a female director, an extremely talented female director, this movie might rub you the wrong way. But for me, I thought it was a really interesting commentary on aging, female beauty standards, and the entertainment industry as a whole.
I really loved everything about this film. It was, like you said, it was nearly perfectly executed. And I loved that ending as well. I thought that it really did a good job at wrapping everything up in a nice little neat bow.
Well, it wasn't neat. It wasn't neat.
It was chaotic.
It was very messy.
But I think that for me, it was a neat little bow to wrap it all up in.
Narratively speaking, I'll allow it.
Correct. I also think that we got some fantastic performances from Demi Moore
Mm-hmm.
and Margaret Qualley in particular
100%.
in this film. I am really excited about what Margaret Qualley is going to be doing as an actor.
Yeah, she's great.
I have seen her in other things, and I really think that she is also growing into an actor that I really want to watch. I hope that she continues to do horror films as well, selfishly, because I think that she really excelled here. But Demi Moore's performance was
So
absolutely
so
incredible.
vulnerable. It's just, I was so floored by it. I don't think I would have the bravery to ever attempt a role like that,
No.
personally, as an actor.
No, and the body horror in this movie was very well executed, very well done. It's kind
Yeah.
of exciting that we were getting a fun body horror movie in
Yeah. It
2024.
has a nice ramp up. It doesn't just drop you into it. I mean, there's body horror in the first act, but that's nothing compared to the third act. I don't know that there was a movie this year that had such a well-defined, singular vision from a director. It was so perfectly executed, such a unique voice in horror. I think this movie deserves every award that it's nominated for and probably more. And I cannot believe that this movie isn't number one on our list.
I really hope that it does get nominated for an Oscar in some capacity because I think that this is the film that could do it.
All right, what is your number one pick for 2024?
My number one pick is Heretic.
Mm.
It is such a good movie. I know that we share our number one. It is so good. Hugh Grant's performance in this film, Sophie Thatcher, Chloe East, all of them giving a fantastic performance. I also really loved the production design in this film. I thought that it was really well done. I loved that we got sort of a singular location. You know, we are sort of locked in this house, and that feeling of claustrophobia is very interesting. And then I think that the messaging that this movie also pulls across is just something that I am very happy to chew on.
Yeah, I've watched this movie a few times, and I think this is a pro-faith movie. But I'm going to quote Sister Barnes here and say that faith is on a spectrum, belief is on a spectrum, and it is not so cut and dried as the arguments that Mr. Reed is making in the film. Hugh Grant gives an incredibly subtle, an incredibly devious performance. Maybe the only complaint I have about that is, as good as he is at controlling people, he is no philosopher. I agree with the girls in a lot of instances, although their arguments are off the cuff and not nearly as well thought out as his. I don't find this movie to be the philosophical powerhouse I thought it was going in. I thought we would have some really good philosophy to chew on here. But at the end of the day, it's one arrogant man trying to control two young, impressionable women. And the fact that Chloe East is not getting as much attention for this film as Sophie Thatcher is sort of a shame. I think they perform equally well. And Chloe East's tour de force at the end of this movie as a final girl is something to be commended. All right, that's our favorite movies of 2024, and we want to hear from you. Let us know what your favorite movie of 2024 was. Let us know your top 10 in the comments. And as always,
Stay spooky, my friends.